Thank you, Karine. Good morning, everybody. So, indeed, I was a researcher at the University of Namur before working at the EDPS. And I used to write a case law review in French, chronique de jurisprudence, in the Journal Européen des Droits de l'Homme, European Journal of Human Rights, each year on ECJ case law and ECHR case law. And this year I didn't do it for the first time. And so the invitation to present the recent case law obliged me to prepare my annual review, which is a good thing, so thank you. So I'm also updated, I hope, as much as I can on the case law. Alors, by recent case law, I mean today, in agreement with Karine, the case law of the ECHR and the CJEU in the year 2016 until now. So previous landmark cases, although recent, I would say the Digital Rights Island case, Google Spain, etc., are not dealt with today because I guess you've heard about it last year or in previous ERA conferences. I will try to give you the substance on each case that have been brought to both courts, although I cannot enter in all the, of course, controversies or nuances or issues of interpretation that may remain in the judgments, but try to give you the main substance for you as practitioners to potentially be used in your practice. Alors, this review does not include private life-related case law. It's focused on data protection, because you know that under Article 8 of the ECHR, the case law relating to interferences into private life is much broader and does not only cover data protection matters, but family issues and so on. Of course, this is not part of this presentation. And I will start trying to find a coherent way to discuss these different cases. I will start with the discussion from the point of view of fundamental rights, meaning the case law dealing with Article 8 of the ECHR or Article 7 and 8 of the Charter, and then going down to Directive 95/46 case law. Alors, as I will start with the case dealing with the issue of articulation of Article 8 and 6, which is Vukota Bojic against Switzerland, a case of 18 October 2016. And this case, in this case, the court basically took the opportunity to recall a rather well-established jurisprudence, and in particular with respect to the notion of interference, legality of interference, and admissibility of evidences collected in violation of Article 8. The applicant, Mrs. Vukota Bojic, was involved in a road traffic accident and subsequently requested a disability pension. But she started to have a dispute with her insurer on the amount of the disability pension, and years of litigation later, her insurer requested that she undergo a fresh medical examination in order to establish additional evidence about her condition. But she refused, and the insurer decided to hire private investigators to conduct secret surveillance on her. And the evidence that they obtained was used in subsequent court proceedings, which resulted in a reduction of Mrs. Vukota Bojic's benefits. And she, of course we can understand her, complained that the surveillance had been in breach of her right to respect for private life, and that it should not have been admitted in proceedings. So that there had been, she alleged, a violation of both Article 8 and Article 6 of the European Convention of Human Rights. And the court indeed found a violation of Article 8, but no violation of Article 6. The court found out that the surveillance was not well provided by law, since the provisions of Swiss law on which it had been based were insufficiently precise. And in particular, they found that the law was not, didn't regulate with clarity how long the surveillance could be conducted, etc. I specify that the surveillance was conducted on Mrs. Vukota-Bojix only exclusively in public spaces, while she was moving around in public spaces. Of course, no surveillance was carried out in his home or private premises. But as the court has says now for a long time, even when there is systematic collection and storage of information on individuals, even in public spaces, there is an interference with Article 8 of the ECHR. In relation to Article 6, however, the court found that the use of the surveillance evidence in Mr. Vukota-Bojix's case against her had not made the proceedings unfair. And the court applied here its usual standard, checking whether the proceeding as a whole was fair. And the court found out that it was the case, since the applicant had been given a fair opportunity to challenge the evidence obtained by the surveillance. And the domestic court had given a reasoned decision as to why it should be admitted. So, yes, a violation of Article 8, but no violation of Article 6, and the National Court was right in accepting the evidence collected against Mrs. Vukota-Bojix. The case Barbulescu against Romania. This is probably one of the most important cases from the ECHR in 2016. You may have heard about it because there have been lots of press articles about this case law, where the court considered that the monitoring of an employee's use of the internet and his resulting dismissal was, in this case, justified. But I tell you immediately that this case is brought to the Grand Chamber, so we are expecting a new judgment by the Grand Chamber. Alors, the case concerned Mr. Barbulescu's dismissal by his employer, a private company, for having used the company's internet for personal purposes, basically discussions with members of his families, as far as I understood, during working hours. And this was actually in breach of internal regulations because the employer had established an absolute ban on employees' use of work equipment for private reasons. So it was strictly and fully prohibited to use for any reasons the internet at work. And the court found that the employer's monitoring, because in order to fire him, of course, the employer had at some point to check the information on the computer and so to monitor the use of the internet by Mr. Barbulescu. And this is how, and on the basis of this check, that they fired him. But the court found that the employer's monitoring of the communication had been reasonable in the context of disciplinary proceeding, and that there were no violation of Article 8. Alors, this case has sometimes been presented in the press as giving employers a carte blanche for the monitoring of employees. This is not exactly the case, although there are several reasons to criticize the reasoning of the court in this judgment. For the record, there are two important previous cases that can be reminded here briefly, Alford and Copland, that dealt with the monitoring of employees. In Alford, the key points of the judgment were that Article 8 can apply to workplaces. depending on whether there was a reasonable expectation of privacy. But this was at least an important statement. Employees may have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their workplaces. In Copland, the ECHR found a violation of Article 8 when an employee's phone calls, emails, and internet use were monitored by the employer. But the crucial point in Copland that led the court to find a violation of Article 8 was that the employee were not notified about the monitoring. So absence of information, the fact that they didn't know that they could be subject to monitoring of their use of internet. And this was a crucial point that led the court to find a violation of Article 8. But what happened in Barbulescu? In Barbulescu, it is not very clear whether he was aware of the possibility to be monitored, whether he had been informed at some point that he could be monitored. And this is a bit, disappointing because it is a crucial, I think it is a crucial point because this may have a broad relevance because there may be a lot of employees that are actually under a comparable situation than the one of Barbulescu. Barbulescu, employers had established an absolute prohibition for employees to use work equipment for private reasons. This is also the main difference between Barbulescu's case and Copland case. This employer decided never ever, no use of internet for private reasons. But it isn't clear whether he was really aware of the fact that a monitoring, any kind of monitoring could apply. And here also we can say that there could be this is crucial because under EU law and under the Directive 95/46, it is very, very likely and that the obligation of information would have applied by virtue of Directive 95/46. So here, if this is not a problem for the Court of Human Rights, at least it would have been, and it is most probably under EU law. The second point is that this judgment raises the important question of whether employers, which impose a general ban on the private use of work equipment, have, therefore, a kind of general prerogative to place their employees under surveillance. Because I decide a ban, it automatically entails that I will exercise at some point a kind of monitoring in order to engage in disciplinary proceedings and eventually dismissal of an employee. And this is most probably one of the big questions that justifies the referral to the Grand Chamber, which will have to decide on this case. Is there any question on this case, Barbulescu? Alors, SABO first. In SABO, the applicants are NGOs, Hungarian NGOs, that claim the violation of privacy because of legislation, Hungarian legislation, establishing a specific anti-terrorism task force within the police force, which had huge prerogatives in the field of secret intelligence gathering, including a wide range of secret powers: secret house search and surveillance with recording, opening of letters and parcels, as well as checking and recording the contents of electronic or computerized communications. And relying on Article 8, the applicants complained that they could potentially be subjected to unjustified and disproportionately intrusive measures within the Hungarian legal framework on secret surveillance. Alors, their main outcome is that for the court there have been a violation of Article 8. According to the court, the Hungarian legislation violates Article 8 because the sections on surveillance for national security purposes were not framed by safeguards which were sufficiently precise, effective and comprehensive in as far as the ordering, execution and potential redressing of such measures were concerned. So it's a very, it's a rather long and rich case and judgment. So I have tried to compile the most important ideas of the court. We can say that first, according to the court, the Hungarian legislation allows strategic, large-scale surveillance. And the court notes in that regard that the legislation that virtually any person in Hungary could be subject to secret surveillance, as the legislation does not describe the categories of persons who in practice may have their communications intercepted. The authorities simply have to identify to the government minister responsible the name of the individuals or the range of persons to be intercepted without demonstrating the actual or presumed relation to any terrorist threat. And the problem, the resulting problem, is that there is no evaluation of the necessity of a surveillance measure in each individual cases, because when requesting this permission from the Minister of Justice, the Anti-Terrorism Task Force just say that it is necessary and doesn't have to provide any evidence in support of their requests. So, as a consequence, there cannot be, on the side of the Minister of Justice, any valid evaluation of the necessity of the surveillance based on the individual suspicion regarding the targeted individual. So there must be more than we needed. Some more information should be provided in order for the authorizing authority to be able to make its own decision, in a way. Also, the court, another element was that the court found the provisions concerning duration of the surveillance very unclear, and the fact that supervision by politically responsible members of the executive, such as the Minister of Justice in this case, does not provide the necessary guarantees against abuse. And it's true that in this case, the court has indicated, I think more strongly than before and in previous cases, that it expects authorization to be carried out by judges or members of the judiciary, although the court does not overturn its prior ruling that non-judicial authorization systems could be admissible if they are sufficiently independent, as was the case in Class and in other case law. But more and more we can see that judicial authorization is, or officials qualified to hold a judicial office clearly have the preference of the ECHR in general. And another problem, and a strong one indeed, is the fact that the Hungarian legislation did not provide any notification obligation of any kind to the individuals subject to surveillance. Not before, of course, but even after the surveillance occurred. So this was a rather important case which followed the Zakharov case of December 2015, adopted just before. And there is a concurring opinion that is interesting to read by the judge Pinto de Albuquerque. Of course, he agrees on the conclusion, violation of Article 8, but he does not fully agree with the reasoning followed by the chamber. Because he believes, and that's interesting because I'm not sure, but I see his point. He believes that in Sabo, the court has a bit lowered the standard to monitor, to adopt a surveillance measure on a target. in previous cases and in Zakharov, which in itself relies on the case Yordashi, mainly with respect to this point, the Court mentioned reasonable suspicion to be involved. You need a reasonable suspicion to be involved in a criminal activity in order to monitor or adopt a surveillance measure. Alors, there is a standard of reasonable suspicion, but also the one that you need a link at some point with something illegal, I would say. Even in the Court of Justice said even indirect or remote one, but a link with something wrong, criminal activity or whatever. And in his view, and if we read the Szabo case, the court focuses on an individual suspicion. The fact that what is important is that you need to identify the targets. But the link with the criminal activity, the concept of reasonable suspicion to be involved in a criminal activity, has somewhat a bit disappeared in the Szabo case. So the idea would be that the court emphasized the necessity to have an individual standard, but not necessarily the link with a criminal activity, which would, in the opinion of the Judge Pinto de Albuquerque, lowered the standard established by the case Zakharov and the previous one in the ECHR. So I think this is interesting because we are talking about mass surveillance, and in mass surveillance the idea is that maybe it's not that we survey everybody, but it's also that the standard we can apply to survey people is pretty malleable, I don't know, but we can flexible. And I could see this, for instance, this is one reproach we can have for the US law, for instance. They claim that they are going to do more targeted surveillances, more individual surveillances, but the link with a criminal activity is not always, is not very clearly required, as long as it is relevant for foreign intelligence purposes. But foreign intelligence purposes can include a lot of other targets without any relation to any criminal activity. It may be perfectly relevant to intercept the communications of religious, highly religious persons or journalists, etc. It may well satisfy the criterion of foreign intelligence relevance, while you do not have this link required at some point with criminal activity. And so this is how and why I understand the concurring opinion of the judge, and why, okay, mass surveillance is bad, we want more targeted surveillance, but beyond targeted surveillance, we want and we understand that we need a link with people that are connected, even indirectly and remotely, but to the prevention or repression of criminal offenses. I don't know if I am clear, because it is a subtle nuance I wanted to explain. So we have plenty of pending cases before the ECHR, some that relate to are related to the Snowden's revelations, and some about the Swedish law and Breyer, the Breyer case, which is about the storage of personal information by service providers due to the legal obligation on the providers to store personal details of all their customers of telecommunication services, even of users of prepaid mobile phone SIM cards. And this is interesting because the court may be led to take a position on whether customers have a right to communicate anonymously by choosing to use prepaid mobile phone SIM cards oriented. Or even if you, when you buy prepaid mobile phone SIM cards, whether you are allowed to collect certain personal data in order to know who is using this SIM card. And so I think this is one of the very interesting judgments that we are waiting for. Now, Tele2. So it is a case before the European Court of Justice. It is the second case on the Data Retention Directive, I would say. You all remember that the court has annulled the Data Retention Directive in 2014 in the judgment Digital Rights Ireland. This directive provided for the general and indiscriminate retention of traffic and location data by providers of telecommunications and electronic communications services. However, you must know as well that following this judgment, many member states, not to say almost all member states, have adopted a pretty lenient interpretation of the court's judgment, and they have claimed strongly that the court doesn't have any problem in principle with the retention of traffic data. Instead, what was at stake in Digital Rights Ireland were the safeguards in place, and that these safeguards were insufficient, and the court emphasized that. And so if we, member states, adjust our legislation with additional or adequate safeguards, we can maintain our national laws of implementation, even if the directive does not exist anymore. And so this is why a second ruling was necessary to maybe to make the point clearer to member states. And the Swedish company brought this case for the European Union because they stopped to retain the data just after the DRI judgment, but the Ministry of Justice report about the consequences of the DRI judgment established that the Swedish law was perfectly right, that the retention and the safeguards were perfect, and so that the Swedish law was not touched at all by the annulment of the directive. And so a litigation arose between Tele2 sorry, and the Swedish state and the litigation arrived at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. So the very question was, had the court condemned in principle the general and indiscriminate retention of traffic data? And the judgment of the court is very rich. There are lots of things that can be and that will be required to be analyzed and interpreted. But the outcome is that, yes, in principle, this obligation of compulsory, indiscriminate, and general retention a priori of traffic data of all users of telecommunication services in the Union is not compatible with Article 7, 8, and 10 of the Charter. So, the reasoning of the court. So first, the court confirms that the national measures at issue, the Swedish law, fall within the scope of its review because it falls within the scope of the e-privacy directive. You must remember that the Data Retention Directive was adopted on the basis of Article 15 of the e-privacy directive, which allowed member states to adopt legislative measures to restrict the scope of the rights and obligations provided for by the e-privacy directive. So all these retention measures were also based on Article 15 of the e-privacy directive. And then when member states adopted in their national legislation, national laws of implementation of the e-privacy directive, we should also see national laws on traffic data retention as an implementation of the e-privacy directive. And so the standard of the charter, etc., applies also to national laws. So this was the first point, because many member states said, now, okay, the Commission doesn't want to adopt a new data retention directive, but it doesn't matter, we maintain it in our own legal system, according to our own standard. And we don't need a European data directive, we maintain our own legislation. And so, of course, the very finding of the court is that legislation prescribing a general and indiscriminate retention of data exceeds the limit of what is strictly necessary and cannot be considered to be justified within a democratic society, as required by the directive read in the light of the Charter. Alors, how does the court reach this conclusion? The court states that with respect to retention, the retained data, taken as a whole, is liable to allow very precise conclusions to be drawn concerning the private lives of the persons whose data has been retained. The interference by national legislation that provides for the retention of traffic data and location data with that right must therefore be considered to be particularly serious. And the fact that the data is retained without the users of electronic communication services being informed of the fact is likely to cause the persons concerned to feel that their private lives are the subject of constant surveillance, which may infringe the right to freedom of expression under Article 10 of the Charter. And this link with Article 10, I think, is very interesting. So the court establishes that only the objective of fighting serious crime is capable of justifying such interference. But legislation prescribing such a general and indiscriminate retention of data does not require there to be any relationship between the data which must be retained and the threat to public security. And we come back to this necessary link between surveying somebody and the fact that this person has something to do, even indirectly or remotely, but with a criminal offense, and which is, I believe, absolutely necessary if we want to make the targeted surveillance meaningful, because the surveillance can be more targeted and not so massive, but then we also need the criteria to know who can be targeted. And it is not restricted to, inter alia, providing for retention of data pertaining to a particular time period and or a geographical area and or a group of persons likely to be involved in a serious crime. So you need a link in order to decide to establish such a measure. Alors, of course, the court makes clear that the directive does not preclude national legislation from imposing a targeted retention of data for the purpose of fighting serious crime, provided that such retention of data is strictly necessary and that national legislation to that effect be clear and precise and provide for sufficient guarantees that the court developed a lot. The legislation must indicate in what circumstances and under which conditions a data retention measures may, as a preventive measure, be adopted. And as an example, the court states that such limits may be set by using a geographical criterion where the competent national authorities consider, on the basis of objective evidence, that there exists in one or more geographical areas a high risk of preparation for a commission of such offenses. Now, after this judgment, I had some discussions with colleagues. I was personally very happy, of course, about the confirmation of the court in Tele2. Some also see that we will have lots of work because we will have to interpret the court's judgment, and does the court allow some retention, and how and in which case, etc. Well, in my view, this is not so impossible to achieve. the court, of course, maintains room for a preventive retention of traffic data, for specific authorization in certain contexts. And I have tried to find examples that could satisfy the court standard and in which cases this may be admissible, and I have found some of them. I can easily imagine that the 14th or 13th of November 2015, a judge could have decided that all the telecommunications of the Paris region should be, traffic data should be retained in order for maybe 2 weeks, in order to allow then some data mining afterwards and see what happened or identify suspicious communications, etc. We understand, and this is why the court sometimes refers to the geographical scope. This is possible to that for a certain period of time and certain region. All Paris area is an example. For a certain period of time, you retain all the traffic data in order for then maybe to collect evidence or things like that. I have also heard about another example I don't know if it was in Italy or in Greece. They collected and retained 1 month of telecommunication data in a city. And this allowed the police, with specific data mining techniques, etc., to identify a network for corruption very clearly of local criminal organization and corruptions, and the link between criminal groups in this city. So if you are conducting a specific investigation, you have a specific request, you know what this data may bring you in the course of your investigation. This is the time is very framed. You have safeguards, etc. I think that kind of, I would say, medium surveillance seems to be allowed by the court. If we take a line from mass surveillance, we collect and retain the data of everybody, to the most targeted surveillance, which is used for the interception of communications, content communications. In relation to traffic data, the standard seems to be somewhere in the middle. The court does not say that no retention at all is possible. Okay, it's very interesting. We turn now to the Breyer case before the Court of Justice. Okay, Patrick Breyer brought an action before the German courts first, seeking an injunction to prevent websites run by the federal German state from registering and storing his IP addresses. And these websites claim that they store the IP addresses in order to prevent cyber attacks, in particular denial of services attacks, and to make it possible to bring criminal proceedings in case of such those attack, denial of service attacks. And the court ruled that the processing and storage of IP addresses of visitors by the operator of a website in order to protect himself against cyber attacks and engage in judicial proceedings constitutes a legitimate interest in compliance with Article 7 of the Directive 95/46. But most importantly, the court has also ruled about the qualification of dynamic IP addresses as personal data or not, and under which conditions dynamic IP addresses should be considered as personal data, especially from the point of view of the operator of a website, which doesn't know the identity of the users. He doesn't have it. He only stores dynamic IP addresses. He's not the telecommunication or the service providers. He's only the website operator. So the issue was whether already the directive applied and whether this data should be considered as personal data from the point of view of the website operator. And the court said yes, that such dynamic IP addresses registered by an online media services provider are personal data because it has the legal means to identify the visitor with the help of additional information, but it has the legal means to obtain the necessary information in order to prosecute, etc. So because this legal channel exists for the website provider, the IP addresses should be considered as personal data. So I don't know if you want to discuss in more detail this issue, because the reasoning of the court is a bit technical. It's on the definition of personal data. But briefly, the court said that to determine whether a person is identifiable, account should be taken of all, because the issue is that whether the users are identifiable or not, because, okay, there is no identity in the first place. It's on the discussion on the identifiability of the users. And the court says that account should be taken of all the means likely reasonably to be used, either by the controller or by any other person to identify the said person. So it is not required that all the information enabling the identification of the data subject must be in the hands of one person. So it is not required that the website operator knows you perfectly. He may have only your IP addresses, but the fact that another third person has the necessary information to identify you is very relevant. But then, account should be taken of all the means likely reasonably to be used, and in particular, the court says that a person would not be identifiable if the identification of the data subject was prohibited by law or practically impossible on account of the fact that it requires a disproportionate effort in terms of time, cost, and manpower, so that the risk of identification appears in reality to be insignificant. So each time, in order to determine whether you are actually processing, a controller is or not a controller, processing personal data or not, this requires a certain case-by-case assessment as to whether you have the legal channels or practical channels to identify at some point the users or data subjects behind. Related cases, I forgot to mention, but you can check Scarlett, the Scarlett case of 2011, which is a related case. Ah no, it's here. Alors, a judgment last week, judgment of the Court of Justice, Rigas Satixme, 4 May 2017. It was a request for a preliminary ruling from the Latvian Supreme Court. The referring court asked whether Article 7F, so the lawfulness the lawful grounds for processing, Article 7F, the legitimate interest of the data controller. This is the legal basis that is discussed here. The referring court asked whether Article 7F of the directive imposes an obligation to disclose all the personal data necessary to launch civil proceedings against the person allegedly responsible for an administrative offense. So here, it is the contrary. Is it compulsory? May you have an obligation because you have the identification data, and do you have an obligation by virtue of Article 7F to provide the additional information necessary for a person to engage in civil proceedings, for instance? It is a bit, so it's a bit, it's somewhat a peculiar case. This is what said the Advocate General, and I agree, because the court essentially, the referring court essentially inquires whether or not the legitimate ground permitting the processing of personal data, which is instead rather a permission, a ground allowing a processing of personal data, can be interpreted as an obligation to process personal data. In this case, disclosure of the relevant information, the identity of the person who caused a car accident. And the court follows the Advocate General by saying that Article 7F cannot be interpreted as establishing an obligation for the controller to disclose the personal data sought by a third party. But in the same time, it does not oppose such disclosure, provided that national law foresees the disclosure of personal data in situations such as the one in the main proceedings. And I mean, it makes sense, perfect sense to me, of course, I think, because if the disclosure would be an obligation, you do not need anymore Article 7F, but you would rely on Article 7C of the directive, providing that a processing may be necessary for compliance with a legal obligation to which the controller is subject. So in that case, the appropriate legal basis would be Article 7C. So it is up to national legislation to establish the cases where a processing operation may be an obligation, certain disclosure or processing or any kind of processing. But it cannot be inferred from Article 7F. No obligation of processing can be inferred from Article 7F. Amazon is about the applicable data protection law. This case is a continuation of the previous case, Veltimo, and it discusses the issue of the applicable national data protection law. And because of the current lack of harmonization under the regime of Directive 95/46, it actually does matter to know which member state's law applies. Well, once we will have the GDPR, most of this discussion will become probably obsolete, but not all. But most of the discussion will be obsolete. But until now, it's relevant to know whether Austrian law, Luxembourg law, Irish law, French law, etc. applies to a certain processing. And it is a case which concerns Amazon, and the issue is to determine the applicable data protection law to Amazon EU, established in Luxembourg, but which pursues electronic commerce targeting Austrian consumers from a website with the extension .de, so from German the website, without having any establishment in Austria. So could Austrian law apply to the case at stake or not? And so this is the interpretation of Article 4, Paragraph 1A of the Directive 95/46, which provides that the national law applicable is the one of the member states where the data controller has an establishment and the data processing is carried out in the context of the activities of that establishment. This means that even if an undertaking is not registered in a certain EU member state, the data protection laws of that member state may still apply if the conditions of Article 4 are fulfilled. As to the definition of an establishment, the CJU confirms its ruling in Veltimo, where it clarifies that an establishment refers to any real and effective activity which is exercised through stable arrangements. In this case, this implies that Austrian or German laws could possibly apply, because there was this website in Germany, .de, but providing commercial services to Austrian consumers as well. But the court leaves this appreciation to the national court. It is for the national court to determine, in the light of that case law and taking account of all the relevant circumstances of the case at issue in the main proceedings, whether Amazon EU carries out the data processing in question in the context of the activities of an establishment situated in a member state other than Luxembourg. So the CJU confirms that the determination of the applicable law to a given processing is again the result of a case-by-case assessment. And what is also interesting is that the court confirms that jurisdiction clauses that are routinely inserted into consumer and commercial contracts may be irrelevant when determining which member state data protection law applies. So will this criteria be relevant in the future once the GDPR, which will have direct effect and all through the Union, will apply? So it is true that most of the discussion in Veltimo and Amazon is likely to become obsolete, and one may expect that the court will come back to the broader approach it adopted in a previous case in Google Spain, because of course it is expected that the disputes in the future will be whether the GDPR applies at all or not. First, to certain processing activities carried out from abroad or outside the Union. So I'm not sure, but I expect litigations to focus more on this issue in the first place. Yes, this is my idea. And I will finish with this one, with the Mani case of March 2017, which we call sometimes the right to be forgotten and companies register. Alors, the facts. Mr. Mani, a director of a company which was awarded a contract for the construction of a tourist complex in Italy, brought an action against the Chamber of Commerce. In his views, the properties in the complex were not sold because it was clear from the company's register that he had been the administrator of another company that went bankrupt. And that was the reason why he had difficulty to make his trade, I would say. So the question, the Supreme Court of Italy decided to refer several questions to the Court of Justice, and it asks whether the directive on the protection of personal data and the directive on disclosure of company documents preclude any person from accessing, without any time limit, data relating to natural persons set out in the company's register. So basically, do natural persons mentioned in company registers as directors of companies, etc., which are personal data, do this person enjoy a certain right to be forgotten? A little like the question was raised in Google Spain. And first, the court analyzes the legal basis of the processing of personal data in companies' register. And the court notes that there are three relevant legitimate grounds in Article 7. Article 7c relates to the compliance with the legal obligations, since companies' registers are established following a legal obligation. Article 7e relating to the exercise of official authority or the performance of a task carried out in the public interest, and Article 7f relating to the realization of a legitimate interest pursued by the controller. And in that respect, the court strongly emphasizes the public nature of company registers and the fact that they are intended to ensure legal certainty in dealings between companies, and in particular to protect the interests of third parties in relation to limited liability companies, since the only safeguards they offer to third parties are their assets. So there is this very strong public interest in accessing this company's register, which is at the origin of their creation for sometimes centuries in some of our member states, that justify the relevance of this information for companies. But then the court has to make an assessment as to whether there can be a natural person linked to a company can invoke to a certain extent a right to be forgotten after a certain period of time. And so the court has to make an assessment of Article 6.1e regarding the principle of limited retention, because data should only be retained as long as it is necessary to achieve the purpose of the processing. And here the court notes that matters requiring the availability of personal data in the company's registers may arise for many years after a company has ceased to exist. And basically the court found that it seems impossible to identify an appropriate period and a single period, because the court compared different national laws in this respect, and there is clearly no common approach between member states, and the court found that it seems impossible to identify clearly a period after which the entry of the data in the register and the disclosure would no longer be necessary, because sometimes the data may be relevant even many, many, many years after the disappearance of a company. So in those circumstances, it is not possible for the court to rule similarly than in Google Spain, and to, I would say, as a principle, establish a right to be forgotten for natural persons mentioned in company registers. The right of erasure cannot be applied. However, and the court then reasoned on the basis of the Charter. Because such absence of right of erasure, there is no possibility, clear right of erasure for natural persons, impossibility to apply the Article 14 of the directive. This constitutes an interference into their fundamental rights enshrined in the Charter. But then the court considers that this interference is not disproportionate, insofar as only a limited number of personal data items are entered in the company register, and it is justified that natural persons who choose to participate in trade through such a limited liability company or joint stock company should be required to disclose data relating to their identity. So according to the court, this is not a disproportionate interference to maintain such data for even very long period of time, and also to deny a right of erasure. However, the court suggests the possibility, for data subject to exercise to a certain extent the right to object following Article 14a, because the court does not exclude that in specific situations, overriding a legitimate reasons relating to the specific case of the person concerned may justify exceptionally that access only to personal data concerning him should be limited upon expiry of a sufficiently long period after the dissolution of the company. And this is important because the court does not question the presence of data and the retention and maintenance of the data in the company's register, the source of the information. What the court foresees is potential access after a long period of time. The access to this information may be restricted. And what the court, I believe, foresees here are the a collection of information from public registry and making such information available online. There are companies specialized in that, scrolling all the public registries, especially for companies registries, and making such information available online. So they access it on the basis that it is public information, and they use it and provide some services online. And here the court admits, which is not the, I think, admits that a natural person may, after a certain period of time, ask for, to block in a way, the disclosure, the access to his data by such companies for the purpose to make it available and freely available online. This is, I think, the objective of this judgment.